Good afternoon. Welcome everyone. Uh, EM has been here, and I'm sure all of you followed his extensive engagements in UNGA, more than 100 counterparts. In DC, he's had series of bilateral engagements. Of course, soon after his arrival, he interacted with the community. Then he's met with Secretaries Blinken, Austin, Raimondo, NSA Sullivan, DNI. There has been a technology focused event that was hosted by NSF. Uh, then we've also had separate interactions with the prominent members of the Congress. You know, the voting started only today, so only a few were available in the city. Then he's also interacted with a number of senior officials, both from White House, NSC, and state, DOD, Treasury, Armed Forces, then some scientists and researchers. With these initial comments, he's also had interactions with the business and two roundtables, one we just finished now. With these initial comments, I'll request EM to make his initial remarks, and then we can have the questions.
Well, thank you, Ambassador. I think it's been three very active, intensive days in Washington. Ambassadors listed out the meetings and interactions that I've had. I'm coming here after a gap of a few months. I was last in April. A lot of things have happened during that period. Of course, our contacts with the administrations have continued, partly because I meet my counterpart quite often on the sidelines of other gatherings. We talk to each other sometimes as well on the phone. There have been continuing contacts, but there is nothing like a visit where you spend time, meet face to face, talk, not just with your counterpart, but other secretaries and leading officials, because our relationship today is so broad and frankly so important that it is essential to have that face-to-face engagement on a regular basis. Overall, my sense is our ties are in a good place. If you look, we've been, our trade's been doing well, investment flows are good, our political exchanges have been very solid. There might be some process issues on visas, but in terms of actual movement of people, it's on a longer time frame again being quite positive. Education, student numbers are again strong. So there's really a lot that we can look at and credit ourselves with. But having said that, I think both sides have recognized this is a relationship of a great capability and potential. There's still a lot of room for it to grow. There are new avenues that we could look at, and part of the reason for the meeting which the ambassador organized with the National Science Foundation was really how do we look at science and technology and research and collaboration in critical and emerging technologies, and really create some big broad avenues for further collaboration. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm I saw on the American side for that. He's walked you down some of my other meetings, but there's also a global context which is very important for my discussions, and they reflected to a great deal my conversations at the UNGA as well. The world economy was already under a lot of stress because of the COVID. Uh, uh, the Ukraine conflict and its repercussions have added to that. We've today, for a lot of countries, including us, higher energy costs, much higher energy costs, are a source of obvious anxiety. We can see food inflation in some countries even face availability challenges. That's another big worry. There are justified concerns about fertilizers, access to fertilizers, and trade in fertilizers. And remember, today's fertilizer problem is going to be tomorrow's food problem. Many countries are struggling with unsustainable debt. There are trade disruptions. So, the big picture, quite honestly, in the world is not an optimistic picture. I think we have a very worried international community, and I saw that for myself in the UN General Assembly. So that too, where was a sort of a broader context in which we had discussions. Because today, if you look at the India-US relationship, it's not a narrow relationship only devoted to each other's gains. I think our relationship today impacts the rest of the world. Definitely does the Indo-Pacific. There are a lot of countries who look to us individually or bilaterally for some part of the betterment which they hope for, and the solutions which the world is searching for in many respects. So that's the sort of broad sense which I want to give you. A bilateral, a very solid, positive, productive bilateral conversation, but framed in the context of larger global challenges, where there's a high degree of convergence on how we look at those challenges. We may articulate it a little bit differently. It's natural, our positions will not be identical, our priorities may sometimes be a little bit different. But again, the good part of the relationship is today that we understand that we have to make space for each other, and that we can work with each other even if we do not entirely agree on every aspect of every issue. So it was I would say, a very comfortable visit in that sense. I think we had some very good conversations, but I'd be happy to respond to any questions or comments or clarifications you may have.
Just to mention, EM is leaving this evening. Hanji.
Sorry. EM, thank you so much for this press conference. Okay, I want to take you back to the Prime Minister's comments in Samarkand, and if I may. The first part has been reported about, and much excitement has been around the first part, that there is not the era of war. The second part is what I'm interested in. The second part is that he said that on phone, we have had this conversation on phone, and we have discussed this very often, that diplomacy and dialogue is the way out. So what happened? What made the Prime Minister go public with this? Something that he had been talking to, as he said, to President Putin privately on telephone calls, but publicly bringing it up, saying this is not an era of war and that you need to.
I'm not sure I would put it the way that you have put it. Remember, this was the first face-to-face meeting which the Prime Minister was having with President Putin after the commencement of the Ukraine conflict. They last met in December of last year. So, it was very natural when they have a face-to-face meeting that you begin the meeting, the press is there, you make the press remarks, and if you look at the video of that particular occasion, that's exactly what happened. Now, it's not as if we have not said that before. that we have been expressing our concern about the conflict, about the need, about the urgency for early cessation of hostilities, about the need for dialogue and diplomacy. So there has been a steady refrain. So I think, to my mind, it was entirely natural that if the Prime Minister of India and the President of Russia were meeting at this juncture, that these subjects would be addressed, and I think that's what the Prime Minister did.
Saurabh Shukla.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mr. Minister, you've had a good visit at the UN and now here bilaterally in Washington, D.C. You spoke about the global context, and in this context, I'm sure you had a discussion with the US counterparts on China. You've served there, and I recall that Prime Minister Narendra Modi made a lot of efforts to bend the relationship with China. You did it. I was part of the delegation when you had gone to Beijing just before COVID. Where do you see the US and India's interest converging when it comes to China? How do you handle a belligerent China, I would say, in Indo-Pacific? Because certainly the relationship between India and China, China and the US is not in a great term. How do you handle China bullying its neighbors in this Indo-Pacific and in the global context?
Where Indian and US interests converge, and they do, I think is on the stability and the security, the progress, the prosperity, the development of the Indo-Pacific. Because you have seen, even in the case of Ukraine, a war fought a great distance away has the potential, has the capability of actually creating turbulence across the world in terms of implications for the daily lives of people. So you have to understand today this is a very globalized, extremely interlocked, a very interdependent world. And it is therefore, we all, to say that we have skin in the game is an understatement. I think we have vital stakes today in ensuring that the larger region is stable, that it is secure, that there is cooperation, that the focus is on the right things. To my view, what we have seen in recent years is an India whose interests and inclinations extend sufficiently eastwards into the Pacific, and a United States which is open enough to work flexibly and comfortably with partners, going beyond the orthodox limitations in the past of treaties and alliances and so on. So the world has changed, and frankly, all of us have changed along with it. And we do today appreciate that no single country by itself can actually shoulder the responsibilities or the burdens of international peace and common good. That it requires a collective effort, it requires a cooperative effort. And India-US is one part of it. We have a bigger gathering or a coordination in terms of the Quad. But there are still bigger ones. I mean, if you look at two new initiatives, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework and the Indo-Pacific Initiative for Maritime Domain Awareness, they extend beyond them. They are open, they have multiple players out there. So to me, a globalized world, countries who are conscious today that the world is not unipolar, it's not bipolar, There have to be multiple players. They need to work together. There are common interests at stake out here. The rest of the region actually looks at many of the more capable countries to pull their weight and work together. I think that's the kind of situation. I believe in defining international affairs in positive terms. That's usually how diplomacy is done. So I would urge you to think of it as really a betterment or a strengthening of the Indo-Pacific as a shared objective between us.
PTI, Lalit Jha.
Thank you, sir. During the meetings with Secretary Blinken, did you raise the issue of F-16 with them in particular, and did they raise the issue of India buying oils and other things from Russia? And secondly, you mentioned about we have a worried international community, as Prime Minister always says, Aapda mein Avshar. What are the opportunities for India in this hour of crisis?
With Secretary Blinken, not just with Secretary Blinken, I think a number of issues pertaining to our neighborhood came up. I mean, you can guess the obvious, but I would not like to characterize the discussion in detail because it's a discussion within a closed room. And by the way, that was also applied to the energy scenario as well. In fact, that particular subject, there were a wider set of discussions and consultations involving others beyond state as well. In terms of it's a difficult scenario and what are the opportunities, I think today there is an expectation, and here I go back to my UNGA discussion. One of the reasons why there were so many meetings this time, frankly, there was a lot of demand for meetings. Countries wanted to talk to us. And countries wanted to talk to us because there is a belief that we are in touch with key players, we can influence them, we can shape their thinking, we can contribute. We are prepared sometimes to say things which many others cannot say, or reach out to countries and leaders in a way may not be possible for everybody to do so. So I would say there is a more than opportunities for India because it's a very difficult situation. I think there are contributions that India can make. I think we have today a stabilizing role, we have a bridging role, we have a diplomatic role. We have to really see in economic terms how can we contribute to the de-risking of the global economy. I think in political terms, how can we in some way help depolarize the world. I think those are really expectations that a lot of other countries, especially countries of the global south, have of us. I mean, obviously, we will try and do what we can, and we remain in touch with all the important countries of the world in that regard.
Sukhpal Dhanwa.
Thank you, Mr. Master. My question is, thank you, sir. My question is on education. As I've been watching, you are very busy and meeting in New York and here different Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Commerce. Did you get a chance to meet anyone from the Biden administration or any organizations on this education field or that? And the second is related to education as well, but that is not question but concern. As we saw in United States, it has been a long time now, sometimes bullying and those kind of incidents. And recently, one incident happened in North Carolina University. One Sikh, Amritari Sikh, was arrested. And I'm glad embassy immediately involved. I got messages, what is happening, and we've been working. So is there any way embassy can take call on those kind of incident, and with Indian American community, we can take some initiative to educate those kind of police and universities. And why I'm talking about this education, I've been watching Ambassador Sandhu was interacting and communicating more than 125 representative or university presidents and so forth. So it will be easy for us to use that platform which he created. Thank you.
You know, the first question in my interactions with the Biden administration, did education come up? Did I interact with anybody dealing with education? The answer is a yes. The education field has different facets to it. One issue right now, for example, is students even getting visas to come to the United States. And the visa issue was something that I took up with the secretary. It came up in the press conference that we did as well. And he explained the compulsions and the constraints on the US. And I think he was very sincere about wanting to rectify the situation. But in terms of students who are here, I think some of the education-related issues came up at the roundtable which NSF did. In fact, there were presidents of 2 universities there, apart from officials who dealt with research and education. With Secretary Blinken himself, and I think to a certain extent some of the other secretaries, you know, the issue came up in terms of the link which students provide today between the 2 countries. That if you see what has changed between our 2 countries, and in fact I spoke about this even in my address to the community. What has really changed with India and the United States, apart from the strategic, the political, the leadership, the government guidance, is actually the people to people, the living bridge between us. And at the heart of the living bridge are students. We today in the Modi government, we give an enormous importance to the welfare and the interests of students. With a number of countries, we are actually negotiating migration and mobility agreements which will allow for opportunities for students to work, to financially support themselves. Where there are concerns on visas, we have addressed them. We actually have within our website a sub-website which is actually dedicated to students. And when there are problems in the United States, I think you have seen the embassy, and sometimes where occasion requires the foreign ministry in Delhi, we take it up. And I think today the strength of our relationship with the United States, it actually allows for very frank and honest conversations, not just on the student issues, I think even on other issues.
If I may just draw your attention, last time when External Affairs Minister was here, he especially went to Harvard University along with Secretary of State, did an education event there, yes, if you remember. I have Rohit Sharma.
Thank you, Minister, for doing this. Vice President Harris is in Japan for the funeral of former Japanese Prime Minister. There she's meeting with the Australian Prime Minister. She's also meeting with the new Japanese Prime Minister, Kishida. Per a senior White House official, she will discuss Quad engagement with them. Given that Indian Prime Minister Modi is also in Japan, any reason why Prime Minister Modi did not get to or did not meet with Vice President Harris, given that India is such an important part of Quad? And the second question I have is essentially on the visas. Did the issue of green card backlog at all feature in your discussions with Secretary Blinken? Thank you.
I'm not, I'm sitting here, so I honestly am not fully conversant with the details of the Prime Minister's program. But my understanding is that his stay in Tokyo was a relatively short stay. And obviously the focus of the stay was on the memorial for Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So I saw, I'm also tracking it like you are. And I saw that his engagements did include a meeting with Prime Minister Kishida, with Mrs. Abe. So I think that was much more the focus of what he was doing. I'm not sure whether he's still there. It's conceivable. I think that he would have departed because it's, I think, a relatively short stay. But as I said, I don't have the details sitting here. Yeah. The green card back. Give a look at the moment. The primary concern that I carried was really the problems which Indians are facing in getting visa appointments of different kinds, and the fact that in many cases the waiting period is as much as a year. That was the focus really of the consular side of my discussions.
Seema Sirohi.
Mr. Minister, you had wide-ranging discussions. I'm wondering if how are the Americans helping us to diversify in terms of arms purchases away from Russia? Are they coming up with any concrete proposals?
I don't think it's a question of Americans helping us to diversify away from somebody else. I mean, we have different relationships with different countries. We think each one of those relationships has its own merit, its own logic, its own value. So the implicit or not so implicit assumption in your question that there is a zero-sum game between them and one moves us away from the other, I don't think is a logic that I would subscribe to. It's always been our effort to actually look at the global opportunities and make the best decision that we can for our security and for our defense procurements. Now, there were times when less options were open to us. Today, in part because Indian diplomacy has striven so hard over many years, we actually are one of those few countries which have a very, very wide range of defense options before us. So we will continue to make the best of the multiple options that are open and take judgment calls based on what works best for us. In terms of inventory that is built up over period, it's natural in any case. If you have equipment from a country or a company, you would go to that country and company for the maintenance, upkeep, or upgradation of that equipment. So I think in some cases these are, if not false debates, I think these are very exaggerated and very simplistic notions about how the trade works.
Have the Americans come up with any proposals to you? Concrete ideas?
Not that I know of, no.
Sriram, Hindu.
Two defense-related questions. In your meeting with Secretary Austin, there was some mention of a dialogue that's going to be launched later this year with artificial intelligence, cyber, and space. Can you tell us at this stage a little bit more about what we should expect? The second question is related to your UN visit last week. You were involved with a couple of France-related trilaterals, and one of them was between France and Australia and India. France was a little bit cheesed off with what was happening in the Indo-Pacific last year because of AUKUS. And I remember at the time there might have been some outreach between France and India. How would you characterize India's role in trying to, would it be fair to say India's playing a role in mediating the relationship of the French with Indo-Pacific countries, especially Australia?
On your first question, honestly, that's a technical dialogue between the Defense Department and the Ministry of Defense. So I really don't have the enough visibility or understanding of it to add further to your knowledge. On your second question, yes, obviously there were some issues between France and Australia last year, which is why the trilateral, which was at that time planned, did not take place. I think between them they seemed to have put that period behind them, and and that's for them to do. I mean, I would not pretend to you that in any way we were involved, but we are very glad that two important partners for us are today have reaffirmed their ability to work together and work with us together. I think that's to our advantage. These trilaterals and more than trilaterals sometimes, these are very effective ways of today conducting international relations. They give you many more possibilities, and I think there was one with Australia, there was one with the UAE as well, where the French were concerned, and there was also a trilateral we did with Australia and Indonesia. So you will see this as a fairly regular way of conducting diplomacy. There's a lot of value. The agenda for this, for our cooperation, trilateral cooperation, I think we were able to come up with broad outlines. What are the overlapping interests? Where is it that our working together can help? Some of it was related to maritime security. Some of it dealt with climate challenges. So we did make good progress even in that first meeting of, not first meeting, but even on this meeting of that trilateral.
Prashant, Hindustan Times.
Thank you for doing this, sir. So yesterday you said that you valued closer coordination in the Indian subcontinent with the US. In that regard, I'd like to ask you if the issue of Myanmar and Bangladesh came up in your discussion with your counterparts. I ask this because elections are due in Bangladesh, and there have been differences in the past with US on the legitimacy and credibility of elections in Bangladesh, and what you make of the situation in Myanmar, where the crisis, both in terms of the lack of democracy and ethnic groups, remains an issue of concern. My second question, if I may, is what is your view on the Russian referendums in Ukraine, and do you think it aids the cause of peace and conforms to the UN Charter, the two principles that you laid out that India stands for?
On your first question, I had a number of discussions, and because each had a time constraint, I tried not to be repetitive or overlapping in my discussions. So some of these issues came up, not necessarily directly with my counterpart, it could be with some of the others. To the best of my recollection, I think we did not go into Bangladesh in any great detail. I think there was just with multiple interlocutors, a broader understanding today that in the Indian subcontinent, it is to our mutual benefit if we coordinate policies more effectively. It is obviously a region where we put in a lot of resources, a lot of energies. It's closer to us, so in a sense we have an understanding of the place, and I think that's something which is appreciated. In some of the meetings, Myanmar came up in a little bit of detail, and I think we exchanged views about where matters stood right now, and whether there was some prospect of improvement on any of its many difficult aspects. So that was broadly that conversation. On your second question, I think it is an issue that will be coming up for consideration. My understanding is in the United Nations, so I would urge you to wait and see what our ambassador there has to say.
Reena Ayyana.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Jaishankar, you did mention about the visa concerns that were flagged with the US, and Secretary Blinken yesterday in the briefing did say that the backlog is being, they are looking into cleaning up the backlog. Is there a time frame? Is there that the US has committed to India or going forward? And what is the message that you'd like to give those who are really concerned about this visa issues?
Well, to the people who are concerned about the visa issues, I would like to give the message that I understand their anxiety and their urgency, and which is precisely the reason why I took up the matter. And to Secretary Blinken, I suggested that if there was something we could do from the Indian government to help the US government deal with this issue in a better way, we would be very open to doing it. I think there might be some issues which he might send our way, but I again feel this is an issue where obviously it's mainly for the US to do, but we will be supportive, collaborative, because it is an issue. I mean, because we have today, and I hear this on a very regular basis in India. I mean, there are families who are not able to meet. There are people who can't keep their business appointments. There are students who are waiting for a long time. So it's a really it's a genuine, serious problem of some magnitude. So, but I'm very confident that, you know, with the sincerity that Secretary Blinken showed, and the seriousness with which I hope they would address this, and you know, with any support that we can provide, we hope that things will improve.
Vishnu Jayaraman, News India Times.
Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you, Foreign Minister. My question is this Prime Minister Modi's message to Russian President Putin that today's era is not an end of the war. Even though this was India's consistent stance, calling for dialogue and diplomacy to de-escalate tensions in Ukraine, his recent public and direct statement to President Putin made a huge impact. Since India is going to assume the presidency of G20 and the United Nations Security Council, how do you view the Russia-Ukraine issue moving forward, given Russia is central to both G20 and the UN Security Council? What challenges do you foresee?
Well, you know, as I had explained in answer to an earlier question, it was a subject which was, you know, an obvious subject to come up at the meeting. And the position that the Prime Minister took was consistent with the position that we have been taking earlier. Now, possibly, you know, it was received and perceived in a way because it was a face-to-face meeting, whereas earlier on, you know, these were reports of conversations that had taken place. So, in terms of the impact that they made on the global media, I think it's understandable that a physical meeting made a stronger impact than a sort of a second-hand report in a way. In terms of the G20 and the UN Security Council, I think this issue will naturally continue to feature in all important international discussions. Where the G20 is concerned, our view is the G20 was primarily financial, economic, sometimes partly a social policy mechanism. That was the mandate or the remit of this organization. Given the fact that the world is today grappling with energy security, food security, fertilizers, debt, trade disruptions, these very critical, pressing problems must be addressed by the body which has a history of 20 years doing this. So I think it's something which really needs to, you know, we hope that will become the focus of what happens when the G20 meets. Obviously, I mean, Ukraine will have some impact on how this works, but, you know, at the moment the presidency is with Indonesia, and this, you know, we have committed our fullest support to Indonesia to ensure a successful G20 presidency. On the Security Council, during our presidency, there will be two themes which will be important. One is on the reform of the United Nations, and you note there have been some developments in that regard, including an American position that has been articulated by President Biden and a Russian position articulated by Foreign Minister Lavrov. Our second theme will be pushing is counterterrorism. That's a widespread global concern today. It's an issue on which we also see a stronger consensus. So those will really be the focus of what we'll be doing.
So Yashwant and Seema have second questions.
Okay, we'll take that and then end with that.
Only
Then
four?
we'll open up a full round.
Thank you.
Okay, four now.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and EM. Thank you so much for taking a second round. My first question is, I have two parts to the question, two questions actually.
Come on.
No, Yashwant.
Okay,
This is
so on the question about the UNSC and upcoming Indian presidency in December, how serious are the Americans now? They have talked about UNSC reforms before, and they have agreed to our claim to a permanent seat. But how serious are they this time? Do you think they really want to push it, which could take it? I mean, the process hasn't moved an inch over since the IGN started. I mean, there is no text to discuss, nothing. So how serious are they this time, and do you hope to get the ball? And second is, after the passing of Queen Elizabeth, a lot of countries, members of the former colonial empire, are re-looking at their relationship. Like Australia wants to end the Dominion status, etc., etc. Are we looking at our membership of the Commonwealth in that sense, or is that something that we don't? Thank you so much.
On the first question, my understanding is that the position that President Biden put forward is the most explicit and specific articulation of the U.S. Support for reform of the UN, including the Security Council. So I don't think it's a reiteration of something. I don't think in that sense it's kind of business as usual. Now, how this advances, where it goes, I think depends on all of us, the members of the UN, and where we take it. It's not the responsibility of a single country, however powerful. I think it's a collective effort that members of the UN have to make, and we have been pressing the reform effort, including through the IGN, and you also know where the reluctance comes from, and let's stay focused on it. We have never thought that it was an easy process, but we do believe that the need for reform cannot be denied forever. The second your second issue was on the Commonwealth. We've had the passing away of a long-standing monarch in UK. I'm not sure I would extrapolate the debate in Australia, and they have a very different relationship and a different history. I would not extrapolate it to India or probably to other countries of the Commonwealth.
Seema.
Could you please give us a sense of your meetings with senators and congressmen last evening? What were some of the concerns they raised? And do you foresee, if the House turns, do you foresee trouble? Just looking in the crystal ball.
I had Ambassador, correct or supplement me if I fall short. We had yesterday Senator Warner, Senator Coons, Chris Coons, Senator Ossoff, Congressman McNerney, Congressman Amibera. I think, would that be the list? Am I missing somebody? I think these were the five with whom we had a meeting. Much of the discussion really revolved around new avenues of partnership. They were all enormously interested on the technology side, on the research side, on the challenge of partnering together on resilient supply chains. We had a good discussion on what was happening in the semiconductor industry. A lot of interest in there is a very widespread recognition in the U.S. today that there's been a dramatic improvement on the ease of doing business in India, that the startup culture, the innovation drive, all these have undergone a big change. So they were, some of it, they were sharing experiences, some of it they were asking questions, but much of it was really focused around the bilateral. There were passing references to the global situation, but by and large, the conversation with the Congress was largely bilateral. On what happens in American politics, I don't do hypothetical questions even about my own country, leave alone about other countries.
Prashant?
So you have consistently maintained in China that till agreements on the border are respected, the situation cannot become normal. China even today said that the situation at the border is overall stable and the emergency response seen after Galwan has moved to quote-unquote normalized management and control. And we have seen this consistent messaging from Beijing about how things are okay, despite your position. Is something getting lost in translation? Do you want to send a stronger message?
No, look, I think if the spokesperson of a foreign ministry were to say something, I would urge you to seek comment from the spokesperson of the foreign ministry of the corresponding country. I think what I have said, to my mind, represents accurate policy assessment of where the state of our relations are. We continue to strive for a relationship with China, but one that is built on mutual sensitivity, mutual respect, and mutual interest.
Sri Ram, who's left? Since you left us for the British, so I just thought that's okay. Yeah. Saurabh Shukla.
I'll come back to China because I was looking for an answer. You're known for your eloquent one-liners. What's your message to the Chinese leadership? And I would ask again, a leadership which is actually indulging in hegemonic behavior in Indo-Pacific. Some straight talk on that, Mr. Minister.
No, I think my last observation should have answered your question.
There are two quick ones, Reena and Dhanwa, and we finish.
So on the business leaders meeting that you had, yesterday and today, what were the concerns? And if you could just, delve into what really was discussed with the leaders.
It was interesting because I get into these business leaders meetings very similar to the manner in which Prime Minister also approaches them. He invites them to express concerns. We take note of very specific problems that they may have, or broad policy, advice or issues that they have. So it's honestly very inviting of I would say of opinions and experiences that they may have had. I was struck by the fact both yesterday and today, hearing from a very broad range of businesses, one, overall appreciation for the improvement in ease of doing business, sectoral, sometimes company specific experiences, saying, today there was an insurance company who spoke about how much, what a big change they saw, and how much more positive they were about their business experiences. A lot of interest in the enabling environment, in the larger environment. People, American businesses are struck by how much more digital India has become, how effectively the government is practicing digital delivery. What a change there has been in startups and innovation. How much more enthusiastic students and young innovators are. A lot of positive references to the drone policy, to the change in labor laws, to the production-linked incentive policy. So, I almost invite, I won't say criticism, but I invite problems. I ask people to say, give me your difficulties. But yesterday and today, much more than I had before, I largely heard a positive appreciation. Doesn't mean that there's no room to grow, doesn't mean that we are heading, we are close to perfection. I'm very real about where we are, and I think so is the government and the Prime Minister. But it did leave me with a reflecting that we appear to have made solid progress, and more important, communicated that to the American business community.
Incidentally, in the NSF meeting also industry had joined in, US industry.
So, this is not.
This is the last.
Yeah.
This is not my question. I'm just going to add one thing, which we are all talking about visa issue. As you were with the Secretary of State day before yesterday night for dinner, I'm not sure either you raised that issue on that night or yesterday, but I was surprised. I was watching Indian media and there was a big news. American embassy in Delhi, they started speed up the process, all the visa process. There was a big news. Maybe my friends, they overlooked, but already it is started in Delhi.
So let's give the Americans the credit.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you, sir. Yes.